While sustainability has remained a focal point in the crypto space since Elon Musk first took issue with those concerns surrounding Bitcoin, it caused a spike in crypto projects that have been pushing sustainability for some time, including the so-called Ethereum killer Cardano, which briefly became the world's third most valuable cryptocurrency earlier this year. In a wide-ranging interview with us, we asked Cardano founder and former Ethereum co-founder as well, Charles Hoskinson, about that, Cardano's progress, and how he's been looking to big names in tech like Mark Cuban to potentially gain traction. Take a listen.
Yeah, I look at it like technology. Back in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, they had originally wood powering steam engines, and they were clear-cutting all the forests of Europe. So if that trend continued, it would have been an ecological disaster. But then they found better fuel sources like coal and oil and so forth, and they were able to mitigate that. And so similarly, innovation gets you out of these situations. The goal of Bitcoin was really saying, hey, we want a decentralized settlement system, and we can teleport this digital gold anywhere in the world instantly. And that was revolutionary for 2009. Remember, now we're in a different place. We have millions of people floating around, thousands of academic papers, millions of lines of code, and an enormous amount of technological investment. And we've just simply moved on. We've innovated to a point where you don't need to clear cut those forests anymore. And unfortunately, the people in the Bitcoin space, some of them feel that there's only one truth, the wood-powered steam engine. But what's nice is that there's a big pivot. If you look at Bitcoin dominance, I think it's around 47, 46%. So altcoins at this point are worth more collectively than Bitcoin is. And there's a lot of institutional money that's leaving proof of work coins, and it's going into greener alternatives, not just because they're more energy efficient, but because a lot of them do more. They support contracts, they have identity, they have metadata. And these are the bread and butter if you actually want to do real financial applications that are regulated and actually global.
Yeah, and Charles, when it comes to how Cardano fits into that mix, right? We've talked a lot about it being an Ethereum killer, so-called Ethereum killer, for a while. When we talk about the technology that it offers, I know you also chatted with Mark Cuban about potentially being the platform that he could look to. I mean, what is it that sets Cardano apart that you've been stressing to some bigger names like him?
Yeah, well, it's interesting about Mark Cuban in particular. We both didn't know that we were already talking to each other. So he has this NFT marketplace that he's been building, and our people were talking to his people about an MOU for integration. And I had no idea that they were talking. He had no idea. So after we had a Twitter spat going back and forth about Cardano, he actually got personally involved in those negotiations. But I think we came to terms on something. But in general, everybody's just trying to understand this. I mean, you have waves of adoption, and I've been in the space a really long time and kind of a weird guy, which is why I have the samurai armor and so forth. But now mainstream real people are coming into the space, and they're trying to figure out, well, what can I do with this? So how do I do lending? How do I do insurance? How do I do payments? And why are these things better than the conventional legacy systems? And usually it breaks down saying you have fast finality, you have global settlement, you have significantly lower cost structures. It's easier to scale things down. So for example, micro IPOs, so you can IPO small scale firms, not just $100 million, $200 million deals and so forth. And the reason we built Cardano was that we wanted to build a collection of protocols that could do all of these things specifically for the developing world, because we saw Africa growing at 10, 15% per year and Southeast Asia growing at similar paces, and do that for some of the poorest people around who over the next 30 to 50 years will build up wealth, and they could be in a completely alternative system that has built into it everything. It has governance built in, it has compliance built in, and so forth. And these are the kinds of conversations we have, and we've seen not only us tremendous growth, but we've seen the industry as a whole have tremendous growth, and actually government adoption is pretty remarkable.
In the short term, though, I mean, when you point to projects being built on Cardano now, or those, I think the protocol, as you laid out, kind of a February timeline for smart contracts to be built on. I mean, what's the update there in terms of building on top of Cardano relative to some of these other projects out there too that also claim to be Ethereum killers?
Well, first off, it's important to understand Ethereum is killing itself. They're replacing Ethereum with Ethereum 2. So Ethereum 2 will kill Ethereum 1. So I think that's the Ethereum killer. We try to do more holistic things. It's not just, can you process smart contracts? It's also, can you do that with identity and compliance? Can you do that with metadata? Can you do that with automated regulation? These types of things. There's a lot of missing pieces. And can you do that at a scale for billions of people? And can you do that with some notion of governance that doesn't require a custodial entity to always be around and take care of it? We're used to custodial entities. You have Microsoft, the Windows, you have Apple to the iPhone and so forth. And you always say, okay, they're the guys who are going to get the next version out. But when you strip away that centralized curator, who's going to make it quantum resistant? Who's going to do the next big innovation? Who's going to make sure it's interoperable with some big legacy payment system or the BIS or something for CBDCs and so forth? So Cardano was really built to be holistic in that respect. For smart contracts, we're almost through that entire rollout. We started in December with metadata, and that allowed us to bring identity to the blockchain. We've already started deploying those systems in Georgia, the country of Georgia, and in Ethiopia for 5 million students. The next major milestone was ability to issue assets on the platform. We're seeing the largest adoption there with NFTs, and there's a lot of NFT platforms coming in. And the final rollout will be programmability. So that's smart contracts, and that's imminent in the platform. So the next 90 days, we should see a lot of beta testing, and then it's just a question of what's the best time to do that for all the people who use it.
Just to return to your point on the ETH killer kind of clarification there, it is interesting because as they shift to proof of stake, you could make the argument that it could be a Cardano killer. That was the sustainability, and that aspect of it was kind of how you guys differentiated. And obviously, if it takes longer for smart contracts, I suppose, to come out, if you say the next 90 days.
I don't look at it that way. I mean, we were always with the mantra of scalability, interoperability, and sustainability. And so, yeah, sure, proof of stake is great. And we're leading that fight. We were first to market with proof of stake over Ethereum. They're still having trouble, but that's only one part of the agenda. That's just saying we have a better engine. Engine doesn't make a BMW a BMW. It's a part of it, but you need the whole ecosystem. You need the whole collection of things. And one of the big things that Eth2 has bowed out on is governance. It's not clear how do you evolve and update the system after the founders retire or lose prominence. And the bigger these systems get, the slower they evolve. Look at Bitcoin. You have these Bitcoin core developers who desperately want to evolve the system and add smart contracts and side chains and new cryptographic primitives like SNORSIGs. They just can't get it done. Even though they all agree it's a good idea and they need to do it for the marketplace to stay competitive, it's just such a big boat. It's like a cruise ship. You move the whole wheel, it doesn't move for a long time. And so Ethereum is suffering from that problem, and they don't have an obvious on-chain governance system. And that's not in the roadmap for Eth2, whereas it's a core part of our roadmap. The second part is interoperability. So protocols like Cosmos and Polkadot and Cardano, others, we make special provisions for sidechains. Ethereum really doesn't do this as well in its current instantiation and in a cost-effective way. Eth2, they kind of have an idea with it, but it's still not clear how that model is going to work, especially when you have interplay with permission and permissionless systems. So they're very different, actually, when you look under the hood. And even if they were the same, there's different user bases. We're bringing millions of people in Africa that simply Ethereum doesn't seem to care about because we never run into their guys or Consensus or other people outside of South Africa and a few well-developed places in Africa. So we have different technologies, we have different philosophies, we have different user bases and different time horizons and so forth. And also very different accounting models. UTXO is a significantly more scalable model because it's got local state instead of global state compared to what Ethereum is proposing. And that's another reason they're having so much difficulty sharding themselves, whereas it's built in by design for our system. So I think we'll be a leader for micropayments. We'll be a leader from when we actually have to shard, and we can scale at much higher levels, but we also have governance and they just simply don't. So I feel better about that. But again, everybody is free to disagree, and that's what makes it fun, right?
And Cardano, I mean, Aikiko, when you talk about people agreeing or disagreeing, it's one of those projects that has taken maybe a little bit longer to show projects being built on top of it than some investors would like. And Charles kind of stressing that, these things take time, and that's the way that he wants to go here. But the sustainability question to me is just fascinating, considering that this project caught a boost on maybe their big, long tweet thread to Elon Musk talking about, hey, look at us, but not necessarily a lot still to show for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing we didn't set it up with. But, when we talked to him initially, it was about his case for Cardano being the much more sustainable option. And to your point, when we talk about the wild swings that we've seen in Bitcoin more recently, Ethereum caught up in that as well. It started with the tweet from Elon Musk initially saying that Tesla would accept Bitcoin, then sort of backtracking on that, saying that he had concerns about sustainability and environmental costs, at which point Charles Hoskinson jumped in and said, are we going to finally have the Cardano discussion? And we did see them get a big surge on the pop on the back of those discussions initially. I mean, he has said that it only uses 6 gigawatts of energy annually, a significant smaller footprint than what we've seen from something like Bitcoin. So no question, they're going to get a lot more attention here. But to your point, it's also about seeing where the proof is, and investors becoming increasingly more discriminatory, just given how many tokens are out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them, and even the ones that are out there, as we're talking about, as we talked to him about with Ethereum, changing the rules around it and going from proof of work like Bitcoin to proof of stake. As we've discussed on this show, a 99% drop in terms of emissions when you do something like that. So I just think it's an ongoing and interesting discussion because, you try and all these projects are trying to separate themselves from one another. And you sometimes do that at the detriment of what you could be, which is just everything. And that's kind of, I think, when we talk about Cardano, as he was laying out, there are a lot of options to go if you haven't necessarily siphoned yourself off into just one. But there are other stories out there. You look at Bitcoin, latched itself to just doing one thing extremely well, which is just digital gold. And once that catches on, you start to see a big big inflow. If everyone agrees that, yeah, that's what it is. So there's two ways to go. It's like a young kid coming out of college, I think. You don't want to give up all your options, but you got to be good at one thing.
Some would argue it's the early days of the internet. I've heard that comparison so many times, but I thought he brought up an interesting point here when he talks about the markets that Cardano is trying to reach, really focusing on some of the developing countries, emerging countries, and so much of our conversation around the crypto trade is very U.S. centric. But he's got a point there about just the potential he sees globally and how specific he's trying to get, at least in addressing a need in a specific market.
Yeah, and to their credit, they do have that one project in Africa when we talk about students trying to show, undoctored records in schools over there. So that is something that he does have to his credit in trying to work over there. We'll just be honest there. But an interesting discussion there with Cardano's founder.